Hi there, I'm going to show you how I create a fully customizable crystal album cover. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next videos. To start, I'm going to open Photoshop with a square file and a black background. I'll insert my image of the crystal CD case, which I've scanned with my printer. Once the file is inserted, I'll use my selection tool to create a mask on my layer to quickly trim my object. Once the mask has been applied, I'll erase the CD from my case, defining a new selection zone and erasing it with the brush tool directly on the mask of my layer. Right-click on my layer to convert it into a dynamic object. This allows me to compress into a single layer without pixelating or destroying my object. From here, I'll select the entire area of my layer and copy and paste. This new layer will be used to recover only the white, transparent part of the case. To do this, I'll create a mask on my new layer. Then I'll Alt+Left click on the mask of my layer, then Ctrl+Versus to paste my previous selection, and double-click outside the layer. We've now recovered only the transparent part of our crystal case. As the mask also plays with transparency, we'll duplicate our layer several times to bring out more detail. Then we'll select our layers and convert them into a dynamic object. We'll add and adjust a brightness, contrast, and level layer to accentuate the object's details. I'll crop the center of the box to remove the round area of the previous mask. Then convert everything into a dynamic object. To add texture to our case, I'll import a plastic texture that I've scanned and trimmed beforehand in the same way as the CD case. I'll fit it over my case, deforming it and trimming the parts that bother me. As before, I'll transform it into a dynamic object, then duplicate this layer and play with a brightness, contrast filter to accentuate the details of my plastic. Once I'm satisfied, I'll convert the whole thing into a dynamic object. Let's move on to the back of our crystal case. To do this, we'll create a new layer and, using a selection tool, we'll define a new area that we'll fill with a color. We'll move our layer under the case texture layers and then double-click to add a filter to change the background color of our layer. I'll create a group that I'll rename to organize my workspace. By Ctrl+Left clicking directly on my layer, I can recover my layer as a selection zone and apply it to my group. Inside my group, I'll import a crumpled paper texture to add detail to my background. Then, by selecting these two layers, I'll transform them into a dynamic object. By double-clicking on my layer, I'll open a new window in Photoshop where I'll find my two previous layers and what allows me to easily customize outside my main project. I'll import a shape and modify its background. Then by pressing Ctrl+S, I'll save my layer, which will have the effect of applying this modification to my previous dynamic object. We're going to reproduce the same principle for the edge of our crystal case. Starting from a shape layer, we'll define an area, turn it into a dynamic object and import a paper texture inside. I'm going to import a CD that I've scanned with my printer. We'll do the same thing as with the CD case. I'll start by placing the CD in proportion to our case. Then using the circle selection tool, I'll draw a round area around our disk and mask my image with this selection. Then transform this layer into a dynamic object. Using Ctrl+A and Ctrl+V, I'll copy the entire area of my layer. I'll create a mask on my new layer. Then I'll Alt+click left on my layer mask, then Ctrl+Versus to paste my previous selection, and double-click outside the layer. This allows me to quickly crop the transparent central part of my CD. I'll create a circle with the Circle Shape tool to recover a selection area. I'll add a new layer group and apply this selection as a mask directly to my group. I'll then duplicate my previous CD Detour layer inside my new group. I'll correct the excess material from my previous clipping. Then duplicate the layer several times and add a brightness, contrast filter. CTRL+ left click on the layer group to retrieve a selection area, Then create a new layer group and right-click and invert selection to take the opposite area to the one retrieved previously and apply it to our new layer group. We'll be able to drag our CD inside this group, then duplicate it and add a brightness, contrast, filter. I'll redisplay our slaps and we'll create two dynamic objects with the two groups of our CD. We can then set our two separate parts as we like. Ctrl plus left click on our outer CD layer to retrieve a new selection area, add a new layer and fill it with a color. Then right-click on this layer to transform it into a dynamic object. Double-click on it to open a new Photoshop window where we can add our design to the CD. To add a border to our CD, I'll take a selection of our CD, fill it with a color and reduce our layer so that our circle is smaller than our CD. Then create a mask on our layer with our design, reverse the previous section and erase our CD border. Once our layers are grouped, I'll double-click on the CD group and add a drop shadow for added realism. Let's move on to setting up our album cover. To do this, I'm going to duplicate the back part so as just to recover the layer group and its mask, which will be identical. I'll import an image of torn paper already cropped, then import a paper texture and drag them into my layer group. Ctrl plus left click on the torn piece of paper to recover a selection zone. Then right-click on my work surface and invert selection to select the inverse zone. By clicking on my layer group mask and using the brush tool, I'll erase what's outside my torn paper, then delete the torn paper layer. I'll apply the same layer group mask to my layer and convert it into a dynamic object. This will give the same area as the one visible in the main file. I'll be able to recover the same selection area with a Ctrl plus left click and in a new layer fill with a color, then convert it into a dynamic object. Now all I have to do is double-click on this layer, integrate my artwork into it and save with Ctrl plus S. Finally, we'll add a texture for added realism directly in our layer group, where our album visual is located. We'll add a graphic element to the edge of our case and we're done. Now you know how to create your own album sleeve from scratch. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments section and I'll be happy to answer them. If you're interested in this visual, you can find it, along with 7 other unique album covers, on my online store. The link is in the description. Thanks for looking and see you next time.